channel, guys. It's Real SD Outdoors. Today I'm going to be going over my top like 5 to 10 baits that I'm going to be throwing when the ice comes off the water. I mean right away. Some of those baits that I'm going to be throwing are moving baits. Some of them are subtle baits such as creature baits and stick worms and other stuff like that. And then it kind of goes all the way up to, you know, some of the bigger glides and top waters. I'm not going to cover any top waters in today's video just because here in South Dakota, when the ice first comes off, those fish are really slow until that water hits like that 60 to 65 degree mark. So I'm going to start with one of the first baits that I'm going to pick up pretty much any time of the year. And to start with that, the first bait that I'm picking up is a open water sniper jig from Beast Coast. I just have a G-Crack bellow stick as my trailer. It's one of my go-tos. Use it pretty much all time of the year. Cold water specifically, that's one of my favorite times to use it. Pairing this one up with 17-pound Invisex. Lew's reel, which is a 7.5 to 1 gear ratio. And for the rod, I'm going with the 6 Sense 7'3" medium heavy fast response rod. This is all around good rod for fishing jigs, spinner baits, anything of the sort. I mean, it pretty much works for anything. This is one of my workhorse rods. I use it all the time. But mainly when I'm throwing this thing out there and those fish are getting ready to push up into their spawning areas, I'm going to be dragging this thing around, not really any structure, but from that transition point from deeper water up shallow. I'm going to be hitting points and everything like that. That's one of the baits that I love. You know, it's almost like a heavy duty Ned rig, basically. You know, 3/8 ounce, all tungsten, with basically a stick bait / Ned rig trailer on the back with an open hook. There's no weed guard on this one, which kind of makes it unique. So that's the first bait that I'm going to be picking up right when the ice comes off of the water. For the second bait that I want to talk about, and I only have 3 of these baits actually rigged up. The other ones I just have in a bag, but we'll go over that when I get there. The next one that I'm going to be talking about is the underspin. There's a bunch of different variations of the underspin. I've had really good luck with the EWG underspin, you know, just the paddle tail with a extra wide gap hook with the blade off of the bottom. Over the past year or so, I've switched to the Megabass underspin. I'll put the name up on screen right now, but I've been switching to this one. It's got a really light wire weed guard with a nice V-shaped head and the blade coming right off the bottom. This one is also ran on 17 to 20 pound Invisex line by Seaguar. This rod is a new rod to my lineup. This one is the 13 Fishing Omen Gold rod, 7-foot moderate, 3/8 to 1 ounce lure weight. This rod up for really cheap. I picked up 2 rods, this rod and the one I'm going to show you. I picked both of those up for $90 on sale at the local Scheels. So I'm going to be running these 2 13 rods this year. A bit of a change. Definitely a good looking rod, and for the price of 40 bucks you can't really beat it. The reel that I have on here is a 6 to 8 to 1 Daiwa CC80 casting reel. I love this reel. One of my go-tos for just basically casting and retrieve techniques. I'm going to put this rod to the test along with this reel this year and see what we can do. The underspin, I like to fish that in that deeper water from 8 feet to 12 feet. Once that water hits about 65 degrees, I like to bump it up to that like 2 feet to 6 feet range, where they could potentially be spawning and pushing up. Where I love to throw this thing. One of those weed lines of the weeds that didn't necessarily die off from the year before, pick up right where they left off. I generally throw an underspin in that area to pick up pike and bass and just cruiser fish, really, fish that are just out looking for bait. Mimic that small profile. That kind of helps catch those finicky bass that aren't necessarily ready for the pressure of summer. I'm not going to commit to a big glide bait or a big swim bait. So yeah, I mean, that's about it. I'm throwing this thing around cover, open water, with just a slow to medium retrieve, just a steady retrieve with a couple pauses in between. My favorite ways to throw it, and yeah, to say the least, I'm really excited to get this combo out on the water, the price that I paid for it. So let's hop onto my last bait that I have rigged up on a rod, and we'll go from there. The last one that I have rigged up is a 8-foot 6-inch Omen Gold bait casting rod. I actually want to say that this main purpose for this one is trolling, but I picked it up for $40 and I'm new into swim baits, so this is going to be my big swim bait rod. Just get a good shot of it right there. And that one is 20-pound monofilament line paired with the 6-to-3-to-1 Shimano SLX reel. This reel's been a workhorse for me in the years past. I've caught big fish on topwater with it. I've caught big fish swimming jigs, pitching jigs, pretty much all of the above, spinner baits and everything else. This reel has been very nice. I'm very pleased with it. But on to the bait that I'm going to be talking about. I think you guys have seen this bait in my most recent big bait breakdown. This is the KGB Shad 180. One of those baits that I'm going to be throwing specifically onto beds. I'm going to wait until that water hits 65 degrees. You can fish it in a little bit colder water, but on this thing over a bed, I'm going to throw it to the bank, and I'm just going to chop it back to the kayak. Try to really get some hang time over those beds and see if you can get the female to come up and actually bite that bait opposed to the male bass. This thing I'm fishing basically anywhere I'd throw a topwater. You guys can go back on the channel and look at some of the other recommended spots that I would throw this thing on my recent video, my big bait breakdown. That's on the channel. I'm throwing this thing mainly around cover, trees that are sticking out of the water, shallow spots where I can see a bed. I'm going to be throwing this thing pretty much anywhere. Not necessarily one that I'm going to pick up all the time, but it does help get bites when the fish start to push up onto the beds and into that 3 to 6 foot range for water. We're going to talk about the next bait that I have. I have a couple different baits that I want to talk about, and those are they're all in a bag. I have those ones bagged up for you guys. I don't have them rigged up just because I'm still waiting on a few things to get some of my spinning rods in line and a couple other things. But on another note, we should be open water fishing in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks from the time that I'm filming this video. Probably about a week and a half from the time of you guys seeing this video. I should be back out on the water relatively soon. I also have some gun-related content that I'll be posting up on the channel here before too long. You guys might actually see that before you end up seeing this video, but we'll kind of just go from there. So I got a whole bag of baits here. Threw together a couple different ones that I wanted to talk about. We'll get these ones out of the way quick because I have 2 different versions, but both of these baits are like phenomenal. I love both of these baits. First, we're going to talk about the 5-inch deep version of the 1-ounce Bass Mafia loaded swim bait. This one, I picked the 5-inch one because you can float along the bank and you can just kind of flip and pitch that 5-inch swim bait up onto beds and up onto the bank and just drag it over top of those beds. The bass here in South Dakota, they get real finicky when they start to spawn. So it takes something like a bigger bait or a jig or even a glide bait sometimes to get over top of that bed and just kill it and let it land on top of the bed. When you do that, most times you get bit. Sometimes they pick that bait up and they throw it off the bed. So I go with the shallow version, which is almost an ounce, and then you have the deep version that's an ounce. And when I'm fishing up shallow, I like to throw the deep one. The deep version, it just has a faster sink rate, so I don't have to modify anything to get it down quicker. The one I'll throw sometimes out deep and give it, 2 or 3 times the amount to actually sink and get down to the bottom. Sometimes they like that slower fall rate. Me personally, I like to throw the ones that have the faster fall rate so I can get it down into the strike zone quicker. But that's just some of my personal preferences on, like I said, keying in on this time of the year being early spring in South Dakota. Those fish aren't pressured, especially at some of the prairie lakes that I fish at. They're not necessarily pressured all winter. They're looking for bigger meals, anywhere from that 5 to 7 inch range. So these are 2 perfect baits to be throwing when the ice comes off the water in your early spring, pretty much anywhere you live all around the country. So that's those two. That's the 5-inch loaded swim bait from Bass Mafia. The ones I want to talk about next, lipless crankbaits. Lipless crankbaits have kind of always been a staple in my arsenal. You know, I don't ever plan to throw them. It's kind of just one of those things you have to fish to the conditions, so I always end up changing to one. Good luck on both of these patterns. This one is the suspending 6 Sense Quake in either perch or bluegill pattern. I've had this bait for a long time. And then this one is the Rapala Rip and Wrap 06 in a crawfish pattern. And this bait is a lot louder for its size, and this bait just has a couple hard bearings in it compared to a bunch of small BBs in the smaller one. These baits I'm going to throw out there, and I'm going to slow roll like a spinner bait. I'm going to throw it out there and count to about 5, let it hit the bottom, and burn it back up to the top, and then kill it. That's one way I like to fish it. The other way I like to fish it is throw it out there and fish it like a bladed jig. Just get it vibrating and then kind of kill it. And then just get it vibrating and kind of kill it. Those are a couple ways that I like to fish these things. I'll be bouncing them off of trees, rocks, pretty much any shallow area where I know those fish are going to be kind of staged up and getting ready to spawn. Sometimes when the water's cold, I'll actually go to a lipless that doesn't have any rattles in it. It's just silent. You guys talk about the silent crankbaits and the square bills, and some of the lipless crankbaits don't have any rattles in them either. And those are just as equally effective as, you know, some of your square bills or flat-sided crankbaits that don't have any rattles in them. Sometimes these tend to get bit more than those baits or a spinner bait or a bladed jig. The bladed jig, in my opinion, is one of my favorite baits to use around the early spring, right before they get into that spawn stage. Almost use it like a spinner bait. 2 lipless crankbaits, one a little smaller of a profile and one a little bit bigger and louder. On to my last ones. Actually, let's see, I got about 3 or 4 left here. The next one that I'm going to talk about is just a swim jig. Just a plain black and blue swim jig with a little 3-inch profile Crush City Mare on the back. I'm pretty much throwing this thing all year. The smaller profile I like to use in the colder water, or in the very late summer months when that water is really warm. When that water is really warm, I like to go back down to a smaller size profile. And when the water is super cold, I like to stick to that small size profile. You know, midsummer, like June, July, August, I'll start throwing like my 9-inch ribbon tail worms, bigger baits like that they're not used to seeing all the time. That, in my opinion, is one of the best times to be throwing those 9-inch worms. I'm basically going to be rigging this up on the same, you know, 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. The more grassier months, and when I'm pitching that thing up shallow and I'm kind of working it as a jig across the bed. That's basically one of my go-to power combos right there is the Berkley Finesse swim jig. It's one of my absolute go-tos. Or one of the last ones I want to talk about is the Z-Man Blade Runner, I think it's called. A 1/2-ounce spinnerbait is which size this is, and this is just in like a silver pattern. This one I was fishing towards the fall of last season, along with the Megabass SV-3 spinnerbait. Basically just never left my side. It's one of those baits that kind of plays into the fall, and if we had open water in the winter, would play into the winter and kind of into the spring. So I keep these close. I'll rotate them out with an underspin. I'm more of a fan of a spinnerbait. Spin does get bit though, and the spinnerbait won't. It's that smaller, compact profile when the water's cold is when you really want to be throwing that smaller profile, like an underspin paddle tail swim bait. So I kind of like to interchange between a spinnerbait, sometimes a 1/4 ounce up to a 1/2 ounce, and sometimes an underspin anywhere from like a 3/16 ounce up to a 1/2 ounce. Had luck on pretty much both of them up here in South Dakota. They're a staple across many of the anglers that are from this area. They'll tell you that a spinnerbait is the deal. You know, that's what gets it done around here is a spinnerbait. A couple other baits that are staples in boxes around here, and I'm going to talk about that one next. And that spinnerbait I'm also going to be rigging up on, you know, 15 to 17 pound fluorocarbon, throwing it on like a 6/4 to 1 gear ratio reel, and anywhere from like a 7-foot to 7'3" rod. You know, that's kind of all personal preference stuff, but that's how I've always done it. So these last 2 baits that I'm going to talk about, the blade bait. Had this one for a couple of years. I've fished it a lot, mainly for smallmouth in really cold water. This one is going to make more action. It's going to be a little louder, and it's going to fall a lot quicker than the lipless crankbaits that I had just showed you guys. Smaller profile, that's kind of what I'm keying back to, is that smaller profile always gets bit. You can fish this thing anywhere from 5 feet of water all the way into like that 30 to 40 to 50 feet of water, vertical jigging for smallmouth bass. This one I generally like to throw on a spinning rod, 12 to 15 pound Suffix 832 braid with a 10 pound Invisex Seaguar leader. Normally throwing it like that and just vertical jigging it, or just a slow retrieve with a pop every now and again. I mean, there's not much to it, just to throw out and retrieve like you would with a lipless, and you can mix in like a yo-yo approach or whatever you want, you know, to get them to bite. So that's my last actual hard bait that I have for you guys. And the last bait that I want to talk about is just a good old Texas rig, whether it's a stick bait or a craw or a fluke. Any of those baits from the spring all the way into the dog days of summer and beyond is going to get bit. I mean, I like to pair my Texas rig specifically with a 3/16 ounce bullet weight with a wide gap hook. Last year or the year before, we had a heavy rainstorm that rolled in, flooded out the lake that we were getting ready to go fish. Showed up the next day and the rain had pushed all those bass up shallow. So we picked up the Texas rig and just a black and blue stroker craw from 6 cents and started pitching them down the bank, and our best 5 went for 20. So I'm gonna start to drift towards a stickworm more this year. It's a bait that I don't have a lot of confidence with, but it's something I know catches them. So I'm gonna start to sway towards that more and put the craw down, because I know the crawfish always works. I pretty much flip these things around structure, anywhere you can see a bed. I'll run this on a little heavier line, 20-pound braid, or I'll go 20-pound fluorocarbon. Gear ratio reel that I'm using, I like 8-speed. Anything in that 8-speed range is what I like to use. For the rod, I'm going to be throwing it on a 7.4 to 7.5 medium heavy, or heavy or extra heavy. You kind of want that faster gear ratio reel, so when they pick it up under the boat or under the kayak, you can get them up quicker before they have a chance to run. So that's the big thing on my gear ratio behind my Texas rigs and my Carolina rigs and some of my other shaky heads and stuff. Shaky heads, drop shots, and Ned rigs, I all sway towards a spinning reel. I just don't have any of those set up for you guys today, so I didn't get any of those baits out. But yeah, I mean, I hope you guys learned something. It's just a couple baits that I like to rig up when at the beginning of the season. Don't overcomplicate it. Just get out, pick a couple of your confidence baits, and just throw them and throw them and throw them. I mean, these are baits that it's taken me 3 or 4 years to kind of figure out what they like at the beginning of the year. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, don't forget to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Turn the notifications on as well. The minute I hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be doing a giveaway, a bunch of soft plastics and jig heads and maybe some other stuff. So stay tuned for that. Turn on post notifications, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video.